Bonjour, life sparklers. It's Claire. Welcome, and thanks for listening to the Integrally Alive podcast, where we explore stories, wisdom, and tools for growing resilience and living life in your own terms. Today is going to be a special episode. We will talk about the power of storytelling and especially writing. And we will have my guest of today sharing her story of resilience, and we will go deep into that. And let's see where it takes us. My guest today started her career in marketing for technology startups in San Francisco's Silicon Valley. After a few near-death experiences, oh my God, this is me being French here, existential crisis and tech burnout, she left tech to pursue her passion for meditation, yoga, and personal development, and ultimately writing. She has since spent her days obsessed with breathing transitions and learning how to navigate the complex theories and practices of this feeling we call life. She has coached and taught her blend of yoga and modern life coaching all over the world. But nowadays, she holds the podcast Movement Unedited, and she is now working as a life coach and writing coach, helping entrepreneurs discover and write the books that live inside of them. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Alice Spire. Nice to have you on board, Alice. Hello.
Hi, thanks so much, Claire. It's really nice to be here.
So, well, I'm sure I won't be the only one to be kind of in your bio. You mentioned a few near-death experiences and existential crisis and tech burnout. So you seem to have more than one story of resilience, actually.
Yeah, so, it's interesting because as we were even talking just before we started recording, I hadn't really seen it as a story of resilience, and I think that's actually one of the most valuable things that we tell ourselves, and this is something that I'm actually kind of dedicating some of my life's work on, which is getting people to see that they're stronger than they think they are.
Yeah.
And so it was really interesting kind of going back through as you're reading this. I'm like, oh yeah, but that's just my life. And yet we forget how incredibly interesting we are as human beings, that the experiences of our life is really just something so enriching because it's so unique to us as individuals, and that it really is just that. So a couple of near-death experiences and it's funny to actually kind of reflect back on because I'm so happy being alive right now, and some of these stories actually took me a really long time to pull out of myself, and I acknowledge that yes, I almost did die, and yes, I'm still here, and yes, it could happen again. And it's the navigation and negotiation of, okay, what am I going to do with this information right now? So my first story in terms of near-death experience, and this is the biggest one, is that I started drinking alcohol at 11 years old, probably even younger than that, but started kind of engaging with getting drunk when I was 11,
okay, yeah.
Mostly because I had so much pressure on myself to get good grades, to be a good kid. Plus also, 11 years old, I hadn't quite hit puberty yet. And so all the transitions of life, and I just didn't understand. I wanted to control everything. And so I went into alcohol. I saw other, and I also wanted to be an adult, mature on my own, freedom, independence. And so I kind of put a different meaning on what I saw adults doing. And I knew that this was some sort of level of freedom for me. And I didn't realize this was a bad habit. I thought I was in control of it because it wasn't every day, and I had known about alcoholism, and no one in my family is an alcoholic, which made it very interesting. And at one point, by the time I hit 15, and now I have friends that I'm drinking with, not just on my own, and we used to drink beer. And this one night we got vodka. And so I treated vodka like beer. And you can't really do that.
Yep.
And accidentally landed myself in a hospital where I was basically, or my friends or family or whoever arrived to the hospital first had The doctors had told them that if I had gotten to the hospital 5 minutes later, I would have been dead.
Wow.
And so I obviously, I didn't know this. I was 15 years old. I was 1 minute drinking with my friends, and the next minute I wake up somewhere. My hands are tied to a bed. I can't speak because I have a ventilator in my throat helping me breathe, because I wasn't able to breathe on my own. I had a tube in my nose because they pumped my stomach full of charcoal. I had all sorts of other tubes like IVs and heart monitor and a catheter, which was in my urethra. So because I couldn't go to the bathroom on my own. So I was just tied to the bed, couldn't talk. I thought I was abducted by aliens, literally, because I was also still drunk. And so I had people saying, oh, she's waking up. And I realized I can't speak. So I asked for a utensil to write, and just kind of going through this experience of like, what happens? And I thought I was dreaming. I was trying to actually put some sort of rationale and logic behind the missing hours that just disappeared from my life. And when you think of near-death experiences, you think, oh, you see the light and you go to it and all of this, which is entirely possible. But what happens to a soul or to a human when they don't know that they died? And this was kind of my case. So I didn't know that I pretty much almost died and was waking up again, basically being reborn. And then I didn't realize, I knew, to me, it was very clear. I had just made a mistake. I didn't see anything wrong with what I had done. Yet I encountered so much fear and scarcity and control, because now everyone wanted to understand, was I suicidal? Were my parents abusing me? What was really going on with this alcohol, and why was I drinking so much?
Yeah. And at any moment, did you realize, I mean, I guess you did afterwards, but before that, did you realize it could have such dramatic consequences? Or when you woke up, you were like, what's this all about? How can this happen? And so on. What was your... For sure. When, I wasn't an idiot when I was 15. You knew like certain things. And when I woke up and realized I was in the hospital, forgive the swear word, but I was like, oh, fuck. Like, my poor parents and what everyone must think of what's going on. And I started crying, and I realized like I cared more about the people in my life than what I was doing to my own self. And I just had so much guilt and shame, and I just didn't know what to do with myself. And I knew the gravity of the situation right away, but I didn't realize how far it had gone. And then when you realize you can't speak, they the doctors or nurses, when they saw me waking up, they're like, you're in Cedars-Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles. You were brought here. You couldn't breathe. You drank too much. Welcome back, or you're alive. And it's just, they're trying to explain to me. And I was like, this is impossible. And then your brain, or at least my brain, was trying to piece together events of the night. But obviously I had no events of the night. Yeah. I remember very, very little. Even still today, there's 3 stories of what happened that night, and I don't know which one is true. So I had to choose which one was true. I had to choose. And then going through my poor family, because I was legitimately, it was a complete surprise. I was always home on time. I was a straight A student. The only thing that was potentially off was that I was really into punk rock, and I was very rebellious, which I feel is pretty normal for 15. And so it was quite a shock. So no one knew what to do, because what else was there? And when a child is, at least in California and the United States, when a minor is brought into a hospital with a severe case of alcohol poisoning, then there's questions of, abuse and suicide and what's going on. And I remember being locked in a room the day after, still in the hospital, with a therapist and her checklist. And she barely looked at me in the face, barely acknowledged me as a human, and just asked me very intense questions that I had never thought about when I was 15. Like, do your parents abuse you? And I was like, no, my parents are great. Like, do you want to kill yourself? I was like, well, kind of right now in this conversation. And I couldn't say it, right? Like, so I'm like, no. And just kind of realizing, wait a second here, I have to be very, very, very careful with how I answer these questions, because how I answer these questions could then determine the rest of my life. And granted, imagine the worst hangover of your life. And someone asked me, right? Yes.
I hadn't even showered yet. I still had vomit in my hair, and this woman is basically. And I'm so glad I realized it at the time. And then I kept thinking of my family outside that door, wondering having absolutely no ability to talk to me or understanding.
Mm-mm.
Probably going through, I never asked my parents this, but probably going through this fear of, will I lose my kid? And and there's more and more layers that came to that. But me as a 15-year-old, I was just like, I kind of just want to go home and just be with myself and understand what happened, because everyone had assumed that I already knew. I had no idea what happened. So I had no idea why or where or what. I had the same questions as them.
Yeah, you see, when we're talking about resilience, well, the first step in resilience is what I call it taming elephants in the room. Because most of the time we get caught in a situation and it's happening slowly and slowly. And then suddenly one day something happens and it's like we were there and suddenly we're here and we didn't see how what was in between was going to that point. And so it's really interesting in your story that suddenly you're like, my suicidal abuse and so no, I'm just a kid that drinks. And then realizing, but maybe it's alcoholism. It's not just drinking, sometimes with friends. And so it's...
Yeah, for me, it was very clear that it was just a mistake. Like, if I had just had a beer, like a liter of beer, which is what we normally drank, instead of a liter of vodka, then we wouldn't be in this situation. And so I was very confused because I was told, like, okay, we can have mistakes in life. However, there are consequences to mistakes. And yet this mistake had such severe consequences because it was so wrapped in fear and scarcity and frustration. And everyone wanted the real story, including myself. And there was no kind of understanding of, well, what is this story? What is going on? I don't know if I even had the capacity to share. And yet alone, here's another thing that you and I have talked about before, is being able to be vulnerable. I was so worried about what everyone else was thinking because that was literally going to determine my future. Because I realized in that moment, I was like, if I talk to the doctor in one way, something can happen. If I talk to the police officer in one way, something else can happen. If I talk to this therapist, perhaps I won't even have my parents. So it was very it was very grave. And I just kind of, obviously, like, I'm still here, and I ended up going home with my family like 2 days later. And then it was just this, okay, what now? What do I do with my life now? Because at such a young age, I was confronted with the fact that I could lose my life and not even know it. Because there was no step to it. And so here I am given a second chance at life. And yet also having this whole, like, live today as it will be the last day of your life. I had that a little bit to an extreme. So I wanted to do more things. And because I had this scarcity that my life could just disappear at any moment, at my hands or at someone else's hands. And I started noticing this, and this can go into the other, like, quote unquote, near death experiences when I was even younger than this, at about, I think I was 10. My brother and I were playing with some fireworks that his friend brought over from Mexico, and it made some loud sounds. And then someone got scared in the neighborhood and called the police, and the police broke into our house, and our parents were out at dinner. And they walk up the stairs, and my room is the first room, and they have their gun, and they pull their gun at me and ask me all these questions, like, where's your brother? Where's your family? And I was like, I didn't realize, because it's dark, I didn't know if it's a robber or a police officer.
Oh my God.
They didn't
even present themselves?
No. Well, they were calling our names in the house. So, like, my brother's name and my name, Elise, David, what's going on? Are you guys here? Are anyone home? Hello. Because so we knew people were in the house that at least knew our names.
Yeah.
We were confused because it wasn't our parents, and it sounded like a family friend. We're like, why is our family friend here? That didn't make any logical sense. And so he comes in my room, points the gun at me, but he doesn't drop the gun when he sees it's a little kid. And he asks me 3 times where my brother is. And I obviously didn't want to tell him. He's pointing a gun at me. I don't know what he's going to do. Yeah. And I'm the youngest. So my brother was in, because we were kids. We're like, oh, we hear noises. Oh, mom and dad were home. We're supposed to be in bed. So we run upstairs and pretend that we're in bed, and then don't expect to get a gun pulled on us. And my brother didn't actually believe me when this happened, because he was across the way in the other room. And by the time the police officer realized that this little kid in bed, he then after he got the information about my brother, he then put the gun down, put it away, and then walked into my brother's room and started talking to my older brother.
Yeah.
At last, I don't judge or blame the police officer, but when you're thinking, I got so scared because I knew exactly what
I'm sorry for them, but it sounds bad. I don't know if it's a regular procedure, but they should revise it if it is, because I mean, no, you don't want to point a gun to a young child like that.
Well, I mean, once you realize that it's a kid, you put the gun away.
Yes.
and this is also probably matters of seconds, right? And it's fascinating. So all these different points, when you realize like how sensitive all of these things, these issues are, people trying to help, and mistakes are very, very simple. And just as so much as, oh, I'll just have another drink and then I'll drive home. I mean, when you think of these types of concepts, and so how this kind of navigated my life, I really understood at a very young age that I'm going to live my life as I want it, because I could die at any moment, and no one will be there to save me. Because what happened, back to the alcohol poisoning incident, what happened then is that the minute my friends heard police sirens, they all ran away or got scared because they didn't want to get arrested. And I was...
So they basically left you alone.
They left me to die on the street alone, yeah. And I this is one of the stories. This is the story that my parents really stuck to. There was another story where one friend ran 2 kilometers, probably about 2 or more kilometers, get to the hospital because they wouldn't let her in the ambulance, and she was worried about me. And other people who I had encountered there who had called the police in the first place because they saw something was up. So there were people helping me. And yet, with fear, my family wanted me to understand fully that the people that I was spending my time with, the people who actually saved my life, probably when I had moments when I had wanted to kill myself, were actually the ones who let me die. So it was really ironic and confusing in my head. So when I started uncovering the stories of myself and realizing, okay, there's no one real story. There's 3 stories and they're all conflicting.
I find it fascinating, this play with something happen. You don't really know what, because you're not conscious all the time. And then you have these stories and the play with, so there are many versions of the story, but then you have to kind of build another one also in face of the police officers and nurses and so on. So this is really interesting, and it's something I'm really sensitive about, and I see it a lot with challenges with as soon as it comes to mental health, it's really easy to get labeled. So what you were saying, so now if I am a suicidal kid, I'm going to have a life like this. If I am an abused kid, I'm going to have a life like that. Because it's, when you break your leg, you're not the broken leg person for all your life, right? But if you attempt suicide, then you are the suicidal person for all your life. Or if you have a schizophrenic episode once in your life, then for life you are schizophrenic or bipolar or whatever it is that you happen to do once. So I find it fascinating how easy it is to get a story from outside, and then how we can navigate with this through our life.
Absolutely. And so much of the next couple of years of my life were navigating that I was a troubled kid. Because which completely eradicated. Which is
funny actually to anyone who knows you a bit today.
Oh, I know, it's so funny. I mean, and that's the thing, was what I was about to say. It completely eradicated all of the good work that I had done up to that point. Yeah. I was still a straight A student. I was still top of my class. Actually, that year I went down because I was like, well, what's the point? I was a straight A student. I was the top of my class. I was just drinking alcohol. I made a mistake. To me, I made a mistake. Yeah. And now I'm labeled this. So why bother getting good grades now? Let's make it true.
Yeah. That's so important. We really grow into the story others make for ourselves. So if we present it with the best of us, we will go there. And if we constantly present it with the worst of us, then it limits us as well. Yeah, and this is something we have to deal with.
Completely. And it's interesting, actually, because it's so ingrained in myself right now that this is one of my stories, that I just somehow, when I feel very connected and close to someone, I assume that they already know. And when I've mentioned it in passing, they're like, wait, what? And they're like, oh yeah, I used to drink myself like silly, like completely. All I cared about was drinking beer or whiskey or whatever. And my friends are like, but you don't drink at all. Yeah. And I can never even imagine you doing that at all. Like, and they're like, is it because of this? And I was like, no, I took a break from drinking in high school and then I went back to it in college, like every normal child does. Like, and then I chose to stop drinking. I still drink. I still have a glass here and there. I chose to stop drinking for completely other reasons.
Yeah.
It was something that it was so interesting when I was telling new friends about this. And these are friends I've had for a couple of years. I just automatically assumed that they knew. And it was a very fascinating conversation where I realized how many different stories I was telling myself and that I was told during that time period that I had since had to untangle and choose. At a certain point in time, you can collect as many stories. I could collect as many stories as I wanted to of what happened that night when I was completely unconscious. Or I could just be like, you know what? This happened. That's it. I can honor the fact that I felt that it was just a mistake, and then I had to deal with the fear and repercussions of that mistake. Yes, probably to an extreme that wasn't maybe even more unhealthy than the situation that started it to begin with. However, it's what happened. What am I going to do with it now? And writing, interestingly enough, since we were talking about the power of storytelling and writing, writing was something that really saved me during that time period, because I couldn't refute any logic from adults. It was not possible for me. I could debate and I could argue, and no matter how intelligent or how aware I was at 15 or 16 at that time, there was no way I could refute that logic, but I had feelings that I needed to sort through. And no one was looking at that. I mean, as I mentioned, the therapist who came in, she had a checklist and she barely looked at me. Yeah. She just wanted answers to the checklist. Yeah. And when you're asking someone very, very uncomfortable questions, and let alone have it be a checklist, and then you're just, it really changes kind of your whole understanding. And actually, I'm kind of grateful that she treated it as a checklist, because it made me think like, why is she asking me these questions? And it's like, oh, why is she asking me these questions? Yeah. And then, so writing about it really helped. And I used to love creative writing in short stories. So I turned this into a story, and I changed the names of the people, and I just, anything I was feeling, I just created a story out of it. And that's how I, and after that I had a whole slew of problems, right? Insomnia and other things that I didn't want to share, because I was so afraid to let people see those sides of me, because if this is how they treated a mistake, how are they going to treat something that's not a mistake? That's intentional.
So actually, this is also so important, because it's something that shows up and up and up and up. And in every challenge we have, it's so difficult today to share when we struggle and our challenges. And actually, coming back to resilience, so first we have to see that there is a problem, right? Because if there's no problem, there's no solution. So first we see the problem. Okay, then what do we do about it? And many times we keep this to ourselves, because as you say, when we shared, maybe we tried to share it once and it wasn't, we had bad experience with that. So actually, how did you navigate with it? I was really interested in what you said I was still a good kid, like having good grades and so on, but they were seeing me as troubled kids. So I became kind of, okay, I'm a troubled kid. Okay, I don't care anymore. How did you came back from that?
Yeah, well, I think I never let myself slip too far, because I started realizing I turned everything into not a confrontation, but a confronting joke. So because people did still see me as a good kid, and they saw me as a good kid who was troubled, who had now overcome it, but I was still in the overcoming phase of it. And so when people were asking me hey, can you talk to my teenager about drinking alcohol? And I would tell them, you don't want me to talk to your kid about drinking alcohol. And they'd be like, well, why not? Because I will tell them to drink. Like, what? And I was like, yeah, because mine was a mistake. I didn't know how much to drink. And this is a problem. Now you're going to tell your kid not to drink, and they're going to spend 18 years of their life at home protected by you, not drinking, and then you're going to send them off to university? What do you think is going to happen then? Now you're cutting less control, and they have no skill set to actually protect themselves or defend themselves or to even understand what it is that they're doing because they don't experience it. I would actually just go to tell them to drink. So you don't want me to talk to your kids. And then the parents were then now confronted. They're like, oh, what's going on now? What do I do? And some parents asked me to talk to their kids because then I realized this was a game. I was like, oh, if I say it really aggressively, then they're not going to ask me more questions, like bury this. And then some parents were like, well, why do you think that? And what about this? And there was a lot more coaching and curiosity and actually genuine conversation. And I opened up a lot more. Yeah. And I would then go and write my stories. And the interesting thing about writing those stories, and while I was still in it, because I really had no other way, because everyone was telling me what I should think. And this is what also happens with teenagers as well. And even yourself. So even in myself, I was being told what I should, to myself, what I should think. But when I started actively writing and not journaling, there's a difference between creative writing and journaling. So yes. I could have journaled about my thoughts and my feelings, but that also feels a little bit weird sometimes. I actually literally created a short story. He said this, the father in this story did this, and it helped me process it so much. I was using my own creativity because now this story happened to someone else. Yes, it might have been rooted in truth, but it was kind of a way to hide. But it was also a therapeutic way to hide because it got me in the perspective of, well, what does this other person think in this story, and what if they actually really cared but just got really angry? And so I really got to understand my parents a little bit better, and I got to understand myself a little bit better and other people in the situation, why my friends were so scared, because one of my friends was actually getting abused at home. So if they got arrested, that was going to be cause for more abuse. So of course that person's going to want to run. Another one of my friends, there's so much more richness and layers to all these stories that we don't know. And part of the surrender is there's some things you're just not going to know. I'm never going to know what happened in those 4 hours that I was completely unconscious, or perhaps even more than 4 hours. I have no idea. I'm just going to call it 4 hours because why not? And so creative writing really helps that. It gets you to see something else. And this is where, and you had said something earlier actually about problems and solutions. Like, what is the problem? And now we can find a solution. And this is actually a challenge of many, many entrepreneurs or people who are in some of these stories and wanting to actually do something about it, save the world. Yet there are many solutions, but not every solution has a problem, but every problem does have a solution. So through the art and practice of understanding and writing and really going deep into what is your story, even if you don't think it's a story, because even me, having gone through so much in my life, all these different resiliences, I still sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, that is a story. That is one of my stories. I didn't even realize that. So we have this kind of dynamic. And then when we can use that creativity to then see what is the problem, we fall in love with the problem. Because by falling in love with the problem, then you have some sort of acceptance. So I fell in love with this problem that I was in with, okay, how do I get some freedoms back? How do I make my parents feel safe with me going out with my friends? How do I show up to school, show my face at school? How do I do all of these things? And the how of it is really, really scary. So I changed all of those hows into what? What if I did this instead? Or what if I asked my parents instead of sneak out, or what's going to happen? And that the question of what puts you back into creativity, puts you back into curiosity, and allows you to not eliminate fear, but sit with it in a different way. And so overcoming that, and how go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, you were. So it's fascinating. It's fascinating to me, and it's. I'm always fascinated with the different ways we find resilience in our life. And there are steps that we all do. Like, first, you have to see the problem, then you have to accept it, what you were saying. As long as you are resisting to something, there's no resilience possible. First, you have, in improv, they say yes and. Well, that's what you have to do with any kind of situation to find resilience. Okay, this is happening. Yes. And what can I do with that? And so what's really interesting in what you did is you said, I was writing and it was my way of hiding from it. But I see in twofold, like, yes, it's a way of hiding from the situation, but at the same time, it's the way to take distance from the situation so you can actually process it. There's a lot of time when we have challenges, and I'm not talking about small challenges, but the kind of, oh my God, I don't want that to happen challenges. Well, emotionally, it's really difficult to stay present with that. And so to say yes, and so and that's why I'm using storytelling, for example, with my clients, so they can distantiate themselves from what is happening. And then it gets really easier to, as you say, see it in a different angles and play with it and realize if this is the beginning of the story, this is not the end. And the end is not yet is yet to come. And so you can write the end of the story. You can create the last part and ask yourself maybe, how would I love it to end? So I really find it fascinating the way, and especially as a teenage, that you spontaneously found your special way to navigate through that and to find your own solutions. And
absolutely. And it's very interesting because I was always writing ever since I was a little kid, but I transitioned this into a therapeutic type of writing because I now had little pieces or little scenarios, and I could change it. If I got into a fight with my dad, for example, I could change that outcome of the story in the story that I was writing, not in my life, but in the story that I was writing. And it got me to release a lot of stuff. And then flash forward to now, and the journey that I've been on now, it's kind of coming back to these little stories. And what I've been working with on entrepreneurs and even people who are kind of having some traumas, because I had taught yoga and meditation mostly specifically for people with addictions and traumas. And the pattern that I've been noticing is that, and it was really comical to see it in myself earlier before we had started recording, that, we forget that this is something that we want to share that's inside of us. Now, not every story is meant to share, but seeing what we want to share and who we want to be as a result of the stories we tell allows us to actually see it as a book in our life and something that someone else can now learn from. Now, there's a reason why you interview people with resilient stories on your podcast, because there's so much growth and learning from that, not only for yourself, but for the person like myself speaking, and also for the people listening. Now, isn't that fascinating? We learn from each other. Humans are fascinating creatures. And that's another story we can tell, because how someone perceives and receives the information that I'm sharing, they're going to connect their own experience to that. And when they perhaps then tell their friend, oh, you should listen to this podcast by Claire Wilde and this episode with Elise Spire, and it's going to give you this, and that. And then that other person will listen and they'll receive something completely different. And it's quite fascinating. So when we can grow ourselves in this capacity, we can start seeing that, maybe I don't want to share the stories of my life, but the learnings from those stories, that I want to share.
Yeah. But
what are those learnings?
Yeah. Something I saw though, and that's why I'm doing these podcasts, and that's why I'm still sharing not only the wisdoms and tools, but the stories as well. Because I saw that in the process of resilience, the first step, taming your elephants, is huge. And it's the most important, because without that, nothing else can happen. It's the very beginning of resilience. And what I'm seeing, as I keep on, interviewing people for this podcast, but also with my clients, I see it again and again and again. There is a situation, and the person got there without realizing what was happening, and then they are in the situation and they don't take the depth of what is really the situation. Many people go into depression or go into burnout or have suicidal tendencies, and they don't see it for what it is until they hit a wall. And it can be a very big wall that, one of these stories is, I think it's episode 4 of the podcast with Sydney Langer, who was also working at Mindvalley, actually. So you might know her. And
actually, she and I are doing a collaboration on something similar to this.
So great.
I'm really glad you brought her up. I just met with her yesterday. We're going to be doing a meditation coloring book that's
that's great.
takes you through a story and a journey and understanding deeper levels of your own kind of approaches to actually life and death, surprisingly.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
I'm glad you mentioned her.
And on this episode, she shared the stories, and we realized she was having depression as a kid. It took her 10 years to realize that. So, and it's not until the day she woke up and decided, okay, today is my last day, I'm going to kill myself. It's a pretty big wall to go into, to have to realize what's really happening. So that's why I share not only the wisdom and the tools, so what we learn from our stories, but also the stories, so other people can always relate in one way or another. Not everyone drank alcohol as heavily as a child, but we can always relate to one way or another to everyone's story. And then we can learn from that and get clarity on our life. And what is the story that we live? What is the story we tell ourselves? And often these are two different stories. Resilience is seeing those and making them congruent, actually. It's one key of resilience.
It's very true. And you mentioned something about hitting walls. I started to learn throughout my life to kind of love that. Love the wall, because when you hit the wall, it's telling you something. It's showing you something. I know Sydney, but I don't know the episode, but I know that when she hit that wall, it told her something. Now she's moving on. And when I hit that wall in high school, it told me something to look at. And it took me probably more than 10 years later to realize, oh, actually, what I was doing there was creating a healing technique and also helping myself be the artist that I was meant to be, which is a writer. And only 2 days ago, I had just finished my first novel. And so it's interesting. They tell things. So falling in love with a problem, falling in love with the wall can really help us see through that true resilience and how we can then negotiate our next steps, because it gives us the opportunity to choose. Oh, you don't want to argue with the wall. You move on from it, or climb over it, or turn directions. It tells you something.
Yeah, well, it's
Did we freeze?
Yeah, you froze a little bit, but we could still understand what you're about. And
okay,
yeah, the bigger the wall, the bigger the learning. But that said, we can also learn to see the wall in a distance and not having to get there to get the learnings. That's what I'm helping people with.
Yes,
you can also avoid like waking up in a hospital without knowing where you are, and still having the same. I still learn something from life, and that's what I'm trying to help people with. So, yeah.
The foresight is really important, but it's also important, I think, to not be so attached to just, because sometimes walls just, they hit you, they find you.
Yeah. Well, which is more my story, for example. Like my father's suicide when I was a kid, and the story he was telling was he was the happiest person on earth. So everyone got really surprised with it. Then my brother suicided as well, and so sometimes, so there are accidents, or you have an illness and you didn't realize before. So sometimes it just hits you, and I totally agree that in any case, when you hit the wall, you have to say yes and go with it.
Yes, and.
Because the more really you resist, the longer it will take for you to overcome it. And like I said, resilience, the first step is really saying yes.
I really love about the
now you're freezing again. Can you? Yeah, you're back. Yes.
Yeah, I can hear you. Yes, I'm back. And one thing that I really love about the yes and is that it just as the what if puts you in a state of creativity, the yes and quiets the critic, acknowledges the critic, Really, oh, but I failed at this. Yes. And I also succeeded here. Or yes, and I'm going to try again. Or yes, and what can I learn from this? And it's a really powerful tool. It's actually something I've been playing with recently as well. Because as you write these stories, and I'm sure your clients experience this as well when you get them to write the stories that they're in, it's quite a vulnerable experience. Yeah. Even if no one reads it. It's a very vulnerable experience. It's you and yourself and what you think and feel about a situation. And yet we're not our thoughts and our feelings. And so we have judgments on that. And we need to then look at this and say, yes, and I'm still writing this. Yes, and I can change the ending to this. Yes, and the fact that I'm writing this is already huge enough. And it's such a powerful medium, allows you to play with the story a little bit. Have a little bit more fun, not take it so seriously.
Yes.
Because life has really intense things. I mean, your father and your brother committed suicide. That's super intense to handle. That's a super resiliency story, not only for yourself and your family, but also for the ones who had committed suicide. Everyone is involved. As humans, we're communal creatures. And we experience that pain from all around, which is why when you were saying everyone can relate to your story, if not everyone had an experience with alcohol poisoning, because we connect. That's what we're built to do, and we connect deeper through stories.
So now we're going towards the end of this episode. We actually touched a little bit on what we will talk about on the next episode, where we will talk totally about what you're doing now, like helping people share their stories in writing and so on. Just before we end, you in your bio were also mentioning existential, and oh my God, I really struggle with that word, existential crisis and a burnout. Maybe
it's a French word.
Yeah, existentiel. In French, it's no problem. Maybe you want to share a little bit about that, and what was your resilient story from these episodes, and then we will.
Sure. So it's all a little bit related. So before,
I guess so. Yeah.
The cause of the drinking was because I was in this existential crisis of what is it all for? And then it's like, okay, well, I can relax with the drink because it's fun. So at least I do all this work, but then I can have fun with my friends and drink. And then after that, going through university and graduating, and now I continued to be straight A student, etc. And then it's like, okay, well, now what is it all for? What did I actually learn from that? What do I do now? And then I realized, I have to earn money and I have to do all these other things that school never taught me. So it got me into this, okay, I built this brain. I'm extremely intelligent, yet what do I do now? And so I had all different phases of this. And when I didn't learn my lesson. And so the lesson of taking it slow and letting life unfold, I was in a hurry because I believed that I could lose my life at any minute. I was in a hurry. And so it had a positive effect because I've been able to accomplish and achieve so much. But the downside was that I'd consistently put myself in growth phases, these existential moments, and then I'd burn myself out. Because when I took all of the energy that I had, I would put it into the work that I was doing. So when I was working in technology and marketing, and I was so fascinated by people and what they would do online, because now we had the technology to actually understand human behavior as they navigate through the internet and technology. And I was fascinated by that. So I would create stories for these products to get people to buy them. And I would go deep into that. So it was a little bit like Mad Men meets technology meets Facebook, etc. And I didn't really, it was kind of really strange. So I was like, I guess this is what life is about. I learn this stuff. I write about it through marketing. I get people to buy useless things. And then I go home and continue drinking with my friends. And so when I started noticing that pattern, I woke up to it, and yet again went to another existential crisis. I was like, wait a second, I already learned this lesson at 15 that I don't want to live for the weekend. So what happens now? And so the burnout really got me to just starts taking a look at my life and seeing, what do I actually want to do? And this is actually when I found yoga, because I had a great life in San Francisco. There was no, the ups and downs of life, but I was content. I was complacent. So in essence, I was bored, which means life wasn't worth living.
Yeah.
And I had also been there, right? So I was like, well, if my life isn't worth living, but I do enjoy my life and I'm being ungrateful, now here's another crisis. And yet I can't sit still. I was unable to sit still because I was constantly working, and in the high pressure environment of startups and technology, you basically need to be a specialized generalist, which is be able to do everything. And in some areas go deep. And which was really great for me as a human. I believed I could do anything, because why not? However, the one thing that I was unable to do during that time period was just relax, just be with myself.
Yes.
And just accept me as me. I needed, in that time period of my life, to do things in order to be. And I needed to do my work in order to do well at work and earn my money and get praise at work. I needed to do things for my friends in order for them to hang out with me. Like all of this stuff, there's really unhealthy stories that I was telling myself. And it took me getting deeper into my body to realize what I was doing to it. Not just bad food or alcohol. It was just, the stress alone was worse. And that I couldn't actually be with myself. And then I started asking myself, well, do I like myself? And started going deeper into that. And then I played games. So all the same games that I did with writing, I did with myself. It's like, well, someone commented, oh, you don't look at someone's eyes when they talk. It's like, oh, interesting. So I looked at my eyes in the mirror. That's a fascinating exercise.
Yes.
And what comes up from that? And you look at someone else's eyes and you start going deeper into this. And what does it all mean? And am I living for the weekend still? And what if my life was flipped around? What if I worked 2-3 days a week and played for 5 days a week? And so I left my job and I traveled through Asia and South America and did what I loved. I learned Portuguese in 6 weeks. I lived with monks and I did relief in Nepal during the earthquake. And there's a bunch of other things that I did just because. So part of that doing nature of this needing to do was still inside me. And I just needed to embrace it. Just needed to do the things that I wanted to do. And have whatever outcome of that be okay. And as a result of that, I've lived a very enriching life. I still have moments of sadness and depression. I still burn myself out sometimes. I still need constant, incessant reminders of taking a moment for myself. But I'm a lot more aware of it now. And I put tools and systems in place to help support me, like writing stories or meditation or really good conversations with my friend named Claire and things like this. And so it's not necessarily removing these things from your life, but learning how to embrace them.
Yes.
And sit with them.
Yeah.
Hang out with them. Use that fear as something that's like, okay, friend, you're here. You're here now. What are we going to do? What are we going to do about it?
Well, thank you. That's so we go coming to the end of this interview, and that's the perfect ending. And sharing, and thanks for sharing that. Well, the last thing about resilience. Once you came back from the challenge and so on, it's realizing resilience happens all the time, and it's not. Let me turn that around. If you're thinking that, okay, now everything is great and I want it to stay like this, and you're kind of afraid of what could come up, and you want to be always positive and always fun and happy and so on, well, that's not resilience, that's fear. And resilience is really my definition is staying connected to life when shit happens. So whatever happens, you can still have the resilience to say yes and be in the situation and go with it. And it doesn't mean you won't be sad or you won't be, angry, but you don't need to suffer from that. You can be in that space and let it go through it, actually, and go on the other side. And that's resilience, is going with the high and low. So thank you for sharing this and really emphasizing on the importance of having tools. Now, when these things happen, because they do, Well, now if you're resilient, you know what to do with it, and you don't let yourself being taken by it and being owned by the situation in the end. So, wow, that was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it.
That was great. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much, Claire.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
So I'm sure you guys got a lot from it, and I've got good news. Alice is coming back next week, so be sure to be here for the next episode. So today we're focused on, actually today I'm doing an experiment, right? See you guys. We were talking with Alice and I realized, let's do 2 episodes. One won't be enough. So today we went deep into the story of resilience that Alice had in her life and that you can take nuggets of wisdom from. Next week, we will go into what she's doing now, which is fascinating. And even more now that I know where it comes from, I'm really eager and curious to hear how you take this into your work today with your clients. Meanwhile, amazing. Make sure you check Alice Spire works. You can find her on Facebook at Told by Alice. Alice is written Alyse. And on Instagram, Told by Alice as well. And be sure to find her podcast on iTunes. It's called Movement Unedited. And we will talk more about this next week. And that's it. Of course, you can find the links in the show notes for this episode on the website, integrallylife.com. And, well, that's the end of this episode. Thank you so much, Alice, for sharing all of this, for having the vulnerability and, and honesty to share this kind of intimate story with us. I'm really grateful for what you shared today.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Claire. Really appreciate it and look forward to connecting to some of you guys online.
Yeah, so thank you everyone for listening. See you next week. If you like what you hear, check the website integrallylife.com for the show notes. Leave a comment. I love reading your feedbacks. Subscribe to the podcast, rate it on iTunes. You will help more people get access to this information and stories. Till next time. And until then, keep sparking life and going from alive-ish to alive. Bye, à bientôt.